Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the afternoon session of day one of City Scripts. If you wanted to write or illustrate a comic but didn't know where to start, you're at the right place. Thank you for spending your afternoon with us here. Very happy to introduce our panelists for the afternoon. C.G. Salamander is a writer, comic journalist, and editor based in Chennai. He enjoys writing horror and humor and likes manga, Terry Pratchett, and cows. Salamander is currently working on a book about mythical beasts. He's also a commissioning editor with close to a decade of work experience in publishing. He's the founding editor of Jellyfish Monthly, ex-commissioning editor at Pratham Books, and has consulted for some of the country's largest publishers. Thank you, Salamander, for agreeing to do this workshop here at City Scripts. We're very happy to have you. Sahitya Rani, an animation film design graduate from the NID Ahmedabad, is an illustrator currently based in Mumbai. She especially enjoys illustrating children's books and comics. She's also a Potterhead who loves filter coffee and anime. She's currently working on an experimental horror comic and a mixed media digital storytelling piece. Her work has been published by Scholastic, Hachette, and The Mint. And she has also worked as a guest art director for Pratham Books. Thank you, Sahitya, for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah.
So I think we will start by sharing our screen. And then, we can sort of like take you through what we have in store for you.
Sounds good.
And if I sound incredibly nervous, it gets better. So I think it takes me about 5 to 10 minutes to ease into this. So yeah. So what we wanted to do today was talk about comics in general, but also about how to write a story. And we've decided to divide the workshop into 2 sections. The first part of it will deal with stories in general and how to craft them. And the second part of the workshop will delve a little more into comics in particular. And I think there's a 15-minute break in between. So yeah, let's get started.
Okay, so I'm just going to move this away. Right, so we're going to start off with what a comic is, basically. And before that, we're just going to go over what all we plan to cover with this session. So firstly, we're going to talk about what comics are, and then we're going to talk about how comics are a really powerful medium to tell all kinds of stories. Then we're going to move into what makes a really good story, like what makes it engaging, what makes it exciting. After that, we'll talk about how we actually write a script and then execute the said script into a comic book page. And during the course of this, we'll also, give you a couple of exercises for you to get a hang of writing. And in the end, we'll just do a quick brainstorming session, have a writing exercise, and also give you some references and extra information that you might need. And of course, any questions you have, just put them in the chat box and we shall answer them. Okay, so firstly, comics, what are comics? Okay, so we've always thought of comics to be these books for children which have colorful images, which have, really great drawings, which is something that you read on a bus ride somewhere and you forget about it the next day. And there are just hundreds and thousands of comics usually targeted towards children. But that is just one aspect of what comics are all about. To put it simply, anything that is any art, any images that are placed, that are juxtaposed in a deliberate sequence, to create meaning, to tell a story, is a comic. So to put it very simply, it's what we call sequential art, right? So you could use photographs, you could use hand-drawn images. You could even just click pictures of an installation, but if they are placed in a sequence one after another, and they tell a story, they have a narrative, it's basically a comic. Now, this is different from cartoons in the sense that a cartoon is usually just a single image. The ones that we see in newspapers, all the R.K. Lakshman ones that we used to see, it's basically a single image with a caption. So that becomes a cartoon. But a comic always needs to have something either preceding it or following the image that you see. So the most important aspect of it is that it's sequential art, which brings us to the next thing that you also, like, you notice the definition is very neutral in terms of what the content of a comic is, which means that a comic, like film or animation or novels, is basically a medium. You can tell any kind of story that you want. Okay, so it can be horror, it can be comedy, it can be romance, it can be thriller, it can be suspense. You can tell any kind of story that you want. It can even be reportage, for that matter. But you can use the medium of sequential art to tell that story. So that basically makes comics extremely versatile. And I think at this point, Andrew, we want to start talking about what actually makes a good story.
Yeah. So like Sahitya just said, comics are just a medium for you to tell your story. They're like movies or, well, prose or just about anything else that we use to tell stories. So before we actually get into the comic aspect of things, I thought it would be a good place for us to start with how to, craft a good story. And I actually can't think of a better way to explain this than by using something called a Vonnegut graph. I don't know if anyone's heard of it. Do comment if you've heard of it, because I think the chat box is our only way of interaction right now. So so to say it very simply, there are two elements that go into making a good story. One is plot, and the second one is character. And these are usually the two things that drive your story forward. And I thought we could do a live drawing session of for us to sort of just illustrate what this would look like or what would go into being a good story.
Okay.
Is that okay, Satya?
Yeah, hang on.
So what we need from you guys is to suggest a very simple story for us to use. So it should be something that is universally known, maybe a fairy tale or something like that. And if I'm not going to get any suggestions in 5 seconds, we're just going to pick Cinderella. Yeah, that's 5 seconds. So we're going to go with Cinderella. Little too late, Monkey in the Hat. Okay, so we're going to start with Cinderella. And how many of you vividly remember the story Cinderella? So, I mean, okay, I'm just going to actually, you know what, the people from the panelists, if you guys can interact, that's also fine. If not, I think I will go back and forth with Sahitya.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Sahitya, how does the story Cinderella start?
So it starts off at the beginning where it actually starts off fairly happy until Cinderella's mother dies, and then he remarries, right? Her father.
Yeah. So
let's take that as the beginning.
Yep. So everything goes well. Everything is going well. Cinderella is living her best life, and she's quite rich. And so I think if we were to plot this on the graph, where you have good and bad on the y-axis and just time and progression on the x-axis, you will kind of start right at the very top. So she's incredibly happy, and she's super happy. She's living her best life, and then all of a sudden something happens.
And what's the next
thing? What is it that happens?
Her mother passes away. So it's just something that's really sad. It's one of the worst lows that happen in her life, right? So it'll be
Yeah.
around
So where would we
here
go with the
somewhere.
graph? Like,
I think it'll go like all the way here somewhere. So so let's go all the way down because
yep.
my mother passed away
Okay.
and
So
her
I think now I'm
sisters.
going to like urge more people to start commenting. What happens after this, guys? Because I'm a little rusty with my Cinderella. Cinderella's mother has died, and now the father remarries. Okay, yeah, okay, perfect. So Shika says father remarries, and Vijay says stepmother. So those are both very important incidents, and we're introduced to new characters. So the father remarries, right? Is this like it's supposed to be a happy incident, but how are the
Yeah,
stepmothers, the stepmother and the stepsisters? Are they nice? They're terrible, someone says.
yeah,
Cruel, a lot of people, wicked. Yeah, so just when Cinderella's life seemed like it had a small glimmer of hope,
yeah. You
her
thought
father
it was
goes
getting
ahead.
better. Yeah,
Yeah, and then her father goes ahead and marries like a horribly cruel woman. And what happens then? Her life is turned miserable because Cinderella has to.
it's just
What?
in
What did
this.
the step? She's bullied by the stepsisters. She has to do all the work. Yep, so that's right. And just when you thought that her life had hit a new low, she is constantly bullied and made to do all the chores. But then there's a glimmer of hope because Cinderella hears about something. What does she hear about? There is an event that is going to happen. I forget what it's going to be. A ball? Yes, that's right. So there's going to be a ball. And where's the ball going to take place? At a palace, yeah. So right here, this upswing is where Cinderella really, she has something to look forward to. She has hope, and so she's going to go to the ball, and but then she doesn't have clothes or a carriage or any of the fancy things that one would need to go to a ball. So what happens now? There are a few people that help Cinderella out.
So we actually it just goes back down because she was really hopeful, but then because she didn't have anything and her sisters left her behind, it's bad again because she's sad. So
Yeah.
until what happens next?
The godmother, not yet. There other people help her out before the godmother, and there's this whole incident where it's this very Disney-esque incident of clothes, and she is helped by rats of all creatures and her woodland friends, I suppose. I might be mixing up Snow White, but it's okay. So she's helped by her friends. And what happens is that yet again she has something to wear to the ball, etc. And her life seems marginally better. But then, our villains, they get hold of it. And what do? You can answer as well, Satya.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just doodling over here. So the sisters just say there's no way you're going. I think they just destroy her clothes and everything, and they just say you have to do a whole bunch of chores that night and you can't leave. So they basically just
Yep.
destroy every
So
ounce of happiness she had.
yeah, and Avantika also agrees and says that they destroy her clothes. And yet again, Cinderella's life is absolutely miserable. And this is where one of the most important characters, or one of the more prominent characters of the story, is introduced. And someone was right before this. It's the fairy godmother. And just like that, by the swish of a wand, Cinderella gets just about everything that she asked for and that she desires.
Yep,
So what is it that she gets?
she has a dress and
You guys can keep answering because it's going to take Sahitya some time to draw or doodle the dress and all the other fancy things
No,
that she
also,
got.
I'm not looking at the chat, so I think, Andrew, you have to keep telling me what.
Yeah. So Vijay says gorilla glass shoes, which is a horrible yeah. So it's something that will damage the plot. But gorilla glass shoes.
I like this.
Yeah, me too. Glass slippers and then a carriage. So the fairy godmother uses her magic and transforms a pumpkin and changes it into a carriage. And she also transforms her animal friends into horses. And now Cinderella finds herself uh, possessing all these things that she needs to go to a ball. So she's got the dress, she's got the carriage, and she's now on her way to the ball. And over there, she meets a dashing young prince. And, as far as romantic comedies go, there's a montage and everything is perfectly happy. But again, as far as romantic comedies go, there is one
Yeah.
condition that was imposed on Cinderella. And you see that little thing over there? There's an incident that takes place at exactly this moment. Uh, does someone know what this is? Okay. Shika says midnight. And that would be right. So what happens in midnight, guys? What happens in midnight, Satya?
Well, the fairy
All the
godmother had
things
one
turn back.
condition. All the things turn
Yeah.
back. So
Yeah. So
she has
everything
to
turns back to
leave.
the way it was.
But so she has to leave
Yep.
the ball, and then we have that chase scene where
We have
she's
a
running and she's running,
direct
she's running.
slump.
Yeah, she's running, she's running, she's running. Her carriage has turned to a pumpkin. Her clothes have turned into rags. You know, her horses have turned into rats, except for that one gorilla glass slipper, which, well, was left behind.
Actually, it doesn't damage the plot at all. It strengthens it because it didn't break. But anyway, so once again, Cinderella's life is far worse than it began.
Yeah, it's so
But
sad.
thankfully, we are nearing the end of the story because there's only so many times you could put your character through such horrible, horrible things. And luckily for Cinderella, someone comes in possession of the glass slipper or the gorilla glass slipper that she left behind. And once they have possession of the slipper, something happens. They go around. What happens, Satya?
Well, they go around the kingdom trying to find somebody, a woman whose foot would fit into the glass slipper, and they go to every house that has a young maiden, eventually
Yep.
coming to Cinderella's house. So we're
Okay.
going back up, we're going back up, we're going back up.
Yeah.
And the slipper fits. Yay! So once the
Yeah.
slipper fits, it's basically off the charts happy, right? Just goes
Yeah.
the typical happily ever after.
So if you look at this graph closely, you'll see that it actually goes, things go from good to bad to better to worse to good-ish to really bad to good again to horribly miserable and then back to happy again. And if you actually paid, or if you kind of take a look and analyze the story, you find two things that were driving the story. Does anyone have a guess about what these two things are? I think I already probably gave it away before we started. I'm not sure. There are two things that are common for all stories: movies, comics, everything. Okay, I'll give away the first one. The first one, oh, someone said plot and character. Avantika
Yeah.
said plot and character, and that's exactly it. So if you can go back to your drawn version of Cinderella, Satya.
Oh, okay. Can you see it?
Yeah. So this is one of those stories where the plot and the character are completely intertwined and go together. So wherever you see these slumps and these peaks, it's usually because one of two things happen, and it's either a significant plot element that's been introduced there, or a significant character has stepped in. For example, the mother dies, which is an incident, so that's completely plot driven, and Cinderella is in complete despair. And then another plot driven incident where her father marries the cruel stepmother, and she inherits two cruel stepsisters. Um, Beyond this is where character kicks in, because you really need your readers to hate your antagonists. So, and the stepmother and stepsisters are thoroughly deplorable. And what happens is that through the plot, they make her undergo all these tortures, and eventually there's a glimmer of hope when Cinderella meets yet another character, the fairy godmother. And again, she's going to the ball, and then there's another plot-based incident that happens, which is the clock striking 12, and everything comes back to normal. And then this is more of a plot feat than a character feat, because we don't really know who the prince is or what sort of a guy he is. For all he could be someone thoroughly deplorable as well. But for the sake of the story, it's his act of searching for Cinderella that creates this upswing where the slipper fits and results in a happily ever after. So there are two elements to the story that are fully essential. And I think we're going to talk about these two elements. And then maybe if we have the time, we will visit another one of these things. And maybe we can get a little more participation with the next one. So yeah, if we move on to the next slide. Yeah, so we have stories that are driven by. Oh, before that, the graph that I showed you is called a Vonnegut graph, and the author Kurt Vonnegut uses it to explain stories. Yeah. So if you move on, can you move to the next slide? So there are stories that are completely plot driven, and then there are stories that are completely character driven. I don't know if you can think of any examples, but if you can keep commenting them or adding them in the comment section. But my rule to find out what story is plot driven and if a story is character driven is to simply try and remember what the story is about. If I remember a character, it's character driven. If I can't remember a single character, but just remember the premise and the plot of a story, then it's entirely plot driven. For example, how many of you can remember characters from the movie Final Destination? I can't think of a single character, but the plot and the premise of the story is fresh in my mind. I know exactly, I know exactly what's going to happen, and it's a perfect example of a story that's just propelled by plot. Another example of this could be, what's that movie where there's it's an alternate, it's a dystopian America, and for one day in a week, you get to do whatever you want, including kill people.
The Purge.
The Purge, yeah.
The Purge.
Yeah. So The Purge is also a good example because I can't remember a single character, but I vividly remember the plot and the scenes. So now an example of a character-driven story is something where you remember the characters more than a plot, or a story where the character takes center stage, or that is to say that events happen around the character, or the character is in control of the events happening around them. I think a perfect example for this would be Harry Potter, or say Asterix, or even Tintin. They are all completely character-driven stories, but they do have elements of plot, obviously, that go in. And I guess, a generalized way to sort of distinguish the two would be mysteries and murder and horror are more likely to be plot-driven, although not always the case, and so on and so forth. And we have like a couple of book covers from books that we've worked on. Yamini and the 7 p.m. Ghosts is completely character-driven because it's all about this very bratty girl and her adventures and how she foils a robbery. And The City of Rubble is a story that is entirely plot-driven. And the premise is actually on the cover itself, because the idea behind this entire book is, what if the buildings you're living in just sort of stood up and started walking away? And so that's kind of what gave rise to both these books. And a good story, however, I think would need elements that are both, would have an equal mix of both plot and character. And maybe we can sort of like take a look at the next slide. So this is, I think, actually you can just go back to the previous slide. So in the story of Cinderella, you have an equal mix of plot and character happening. And the more balanced you can be about it, the better your story is going to be. And we actually have like a few general rules or guidelines. But before that, I think we'll take a look at plotting to executing. Again, this is just going to be a really quick run through of, of how we work on stories or how I write stories. 80% of the time, I'm writing blind, by which I mean that I don't know what's happening. I don't know what my characters are going to do. I don't know what's around the corner, and I'm completely in the dark about what's going to happen next. And these are the stories that are hardest to get published, because of the 80% of the time that I'm writing this, I'd say a good 70% of the time, I just end up writing crap, like absolute, because I think it's very hit or miss. So when you really strike that, when you write blind and you kind of just get it right, there's no better feeling. And in my opinion, the story is almost always better, because when you write blind, you have fun with the story. Like your characters, as cliched as this is going to sound, your characters talk to you and you want to see what's happening next. So along with your readers, you are every bit as interested in finding out what is going to happen with the plot or what is going to happen with the story. But sadly, most of the time when people do this, unless they're incredibly skilled, you end up with stuff that should maybe not, leave your drawer or see the light of day. And which is why I've written, this is actually supposed to be in my speaker notes. It should say not everything needs to be published, as a harsh reminder. But I don't know how it got to the main slide. But anyway, but when you're writing blind, it's very important to write for yourself. Somebody's asked if we would share the slides at the end, and yeah, sure, we can share the slides. Okay, now for the second type of writing, which is outlining. And this is something that I do 20% of the time when I write for myself, and I think about 100% of the time when I'm commissioned to do something. So by a commission, I mean when a publisher or a news outlet is paying me money to give them exactly what they want. And there are few cases where I have written stories like this, and I'm unable to tell the difference if it was outlined or if I've written blind. And in my opinion, that's a really nice place to be. But anyway, so coming to outlining, it's important for you to have an idea of your story. So even if it's a very simple account of what your day was like, you need to kind of have your idea written down. And once you have your idea down, I think it is very, very integral to outline it as comprehensively as possible. And what I mean when I say this is that you can take a week to sort of iron out the details and get into writing your story, or getting the outlines right, because this is sort of the skeletal structure of your story. And if this doesn't, if you know, if your skeleton is filled with rot, then your story is not going to stand, regardless of how pretty it is, um, or at least I feel so. And when you start outlining, I think what is important for you to do is to write it down completely. So take about 10 pages or 12 pages, add all the spoilers, etc. So you just completely list it all down, break it all up, and make sure that your start is strong. Like you draw your readers in right at the very beginning, and this is something that is very important. So your ending needs to be convincing, because the thing that separates a good review from a bad review is, you know, having your audience hooked on a book for the longest time and then like completely undoing that with an ending that is absolutely silly, or you know, sort of insults their intellect. But most importantly, when you plot, you get to see what the middle is like. And I think the middle of a story or a novel or a comic is the most important bit. Because how many books can you think of where you sort of just dropped off right in the middle? Like it started off well and then something just happened. Um, I think it's a problem that plagues a lot of writers, and when your middle sags, uh, something happens to the story. Like that's when your readers drop away. And if you're a children's writer, then this is your biggest concern, because your primary objective as a children's writer is to retain readership. So when I write children's books, or when Sahitya is illustrating for children's books, we want them to read. So we want them to continue reading. So it's important for your middle to stay as strong as the rest of the book. And moving on from this, I'm just going to take a look at my notes. Um, yeah, so this is something that I don't do myself, but keeping your ending before planned out beforehand, especially if you're writing a mystery or you know, horror, it really works, because you get to keep adding clues that that bring your reader up to speed, essentially. Uh, and yeah, so I think I'm just going to move right on to the next section, because if I keep talking about this, I'm going to just ramble on about things that are not important. So these are general guidelines, or rather suggested guidelines. Again, these are things that have worked for me. It's not for everyone, because a lot of writers break the rules all the time, and so do a lot of illustrators. But I feel at a basic level, you know, you kind of need an understanding of what these rules are, and you need to be able to write with these rules if you want to break format, or if you want to try something more experimental. So these are some rules that I often stick to, especially with children's writing. So rule number one is to come up with a character that your audience likes. It seems simple enough, but I think myself included, my first drafts, well, my characters aren't very likable. And then they have to undergo a transformation, and then they have to become likable again. And my side characters are far more likable than the main characters are, because what I do is that I fill my main characters up with a lot of flaws for them to work through, or you know, like throw situations that they don't handle too well. But I think it's very important for you to have a character that is liked, or that is pitied at the very least. Like Cinderella, for instance, I mean, we feel sorry for her, and the reason why she, as a character, is enjoyed is because there is a small likability about her. I mean, she hangs out with rats. She is persistent, and yeah, and well, she's not got much going on for her, so you kind of want her to win. So she's the underdog essentially. Your second thing is that your character must want something. And Cinderella is a very bad example for this. I mean, yes, she wanted to go to the ball, but in general, I think your characters need to have bigger aspirations in life. And but your characters, they need something. And I don't mean like a big long quest for them to go on, something where they get to slay a monster. But if you're writing about a kid that's trying to steal back his report card or something like that, something as silly as that, he wants or he needs to do a particular thing. So it can be as simple as that. There's this Tamil movie called Kaka Muttai where the entire premise revolves around the characters wanting a slice of pizza. Uh, and that sort of propels the entire narrative forward, and you're introduced to all sorts of fun characters along the way. And the next general or suggested guideline is to put your characters through hell. And this is something, I mean, I'm actually pretty good at. I'm good at putting my characters through hell because this is the only way where your readers will know what your characters are made up of. So it's a lot like this thing, right? Where I don't know if you guys have thought about this, but I certainly have. Um, like it's the superhero idea, or just the hero idea essentially. So let me like try to paint an image really quickly. So say you are at the crosswalk of a road, and then well, there's a kid on the road, and there's a truck that's speeding towards them. How many of you would actually like put your life at risk and jump to save them, versus how many of you would not do it and watch the kid die? And this is one of those incidents where I think it may be easy to say I will save them, but in the moment your legs tend to freeze up. And moments like these are where you actually get to know the worth and the value of your characters, and it also what differentiates your heroes from your villains. um, because say it could go one of two ways. Say you did save the kid, and then you're hailed as a hero, and that could be one arc, and then maybe this thing gets like the cheers get to you, and before you've become some sort of a psycho that's trying to put more kids in harm's way to save. Or alternatively, you avoid saving the child and are so guilt-ridden that you have a life-changing moment that gives you your own character journey for you to live through. So the idea is putting them through hell, have the worst things happen to them, and have them reveal to you and your readers what really drives them. Um, so the first three are character related points. And I think the next few are going to be plot related with a few things that intersect. Um, since I'm primarily a children's book writer, and since Sahitya is also uh, primarily a children's illustrator, only the comics that we do are for adults, by the way. And yeah. So anyway, so my point was that since we come from a tradition of writing for children, it goes back to readership dropping, because if a kid is uninterested in your book, then you've lost your reader. For all like you've lost them to YouTube or to the TV or just about anything. So you need to be very short with whatever you're saying, and by definition, you need to write to either reveal who your characters are, or to unravel the plot, And you should do one of these two things, or like every sentence that you write should do one of these two things. Um, I also feel that exposition is not important. We don't need to know where your character grew up, what their circumstances are. We don't need any of that up until we do need to know that. So, and I think what helps with this is to start close to the action, or start as close to the action as possible. So, if there is a life-changing event that your character is going to go through, start right at the life-changing event, and then if you need to scale back, you can scale back. Um, and I'm just going to quickly go through the next 3 points. Yeah, so this is giving your reader more information than you think they need. And I know it sounds counterintuitive to the previous one, but the information that you give them should go towards unraveling the plot or revealing character. By which I mean, if you have a story where somebody has stolen, say, a golden ring, and your readers are trying to find out who it is that has stolen the golden ring, along with your main character, then you need to pepper your story with clues or enough information such that they can, once they have the reveal, they can sort of piece together the clues and find out what exactly has happened. And I think the tact in this comes in the fact that you need to keep your readers in the dark, but at the same time, you need to keep them in the loop. And if you success at giving them all the clues and then dazzling or blowing their mind at the end, then I think you've done your work well. And then I think the most important thing to remember while writing a story is that we write from three different ways, I think. From experience, memories, and then our imagination. And finally, just write for yourself and sort of trust your instinct. And now that we know all of this, I thought it would be a fun exercise for us to try and come up with our own story. It could, and I think the best way to do it is to go back to just the idea of it, and we're going to try and write a paragraph where you have your story's idea, and let us know if you want help with this, because we could suggest like popular tropes or plots, but it can be something as simple as say what your day was like, or it could be as complicated as where your life story, or it could be anywhere in between. But I think for the sake of time, we should stick with something a little more simple. So yeah, Sahitya, do you have any ideas about this?
I think there's so much, I think the best way to start off is look at experiences, right? So even if it's just, a morning, I don't know, like I'm in Benares right now, so an evening on the Ghat, what that would comprise of. Okay, wait, I think,
What about a mix of
hang on, something.
blind writing and an outline? Somebody's asked, what about a mix of blind writing and an outline? To be honest, I think it ends up that way because you can't plot everything to the detail. So you are writing blind for a considerable part of your writing. And coming back to writing out of experience and memories, I think a good way to start is to write what you know about. For example, there are a few cities that I can write about really well: Kodaikanal, Chennai, Allahabad, and I think maybe Delhi to a certain extent, but only because I have a connection with these cities and Bangalore. And so it always makes sense for you to write something that you know already. So if you're a teacher, like it's a good starting point, which I don't mean that you just sort of write about this and stick to this, but since this is a workshop environment, and if you guys want to get started on a small paragraph, you could just write about something that you know. We can also try and come up with really cheesy plot lines if you guys would like that. Like, for example, say you are flying in a plane, and while as you fly, there's a small bit of turbulence, and then you look outside the window, and then you see something, or you think you see something, and then you convince yourself it's just nothing at all. It's just maybe the clouds or whatever. And just as you're trying to go to sleep, you hear a knock on the door, and slowly everyone from the plane hears a knock on the door, and that could be a premise to start you off. So this is usually a lot more easy if we have interaction, because there's people talking. So I think it's just sort of Sahitya and I kind of going back and forth at each other. But yeah, so what else do you think, Rani? You know what? Let's make it very easy. Let's make it very simple, and let's make it like very person centric. Guys, you're going to write a love letter, and you're all going to write a love letter to yourselves. And there's going to be a break, I think, in about 10 minutes. So I think this is the perfect time for you guys to start writing. And this is one of those writing exercises that is you'll find in every single writing workshop. And it's an amazing way to sort of separate the psychopaths and the narcissists from the yeah. So what you're going to do is you're going to write a love letter to yourselves, and it can be whatever you want it to be. And when we come back, we are going to start talking about comics and how to write them, and then we will have more exercises that are comic based.
So do we take that break now?
This feels like therapy, someone says. So if you guys have any questions, you can actually, ask us. But I think you can use this 10 minutes or the 9 minutes to continue with your story, and feel free to mute me because I tend to keep talking.
And then I think we'll come back and move on to the next bit about, comic specific stuff. So if anyone's actually done writing and it's something you want to share with us, you can. Right now, while we're waiting, we still have a couple of minutes. Okay, so Vijay has written something. Andrew, he says, "Love me or hate me, I keep running into you every now and then in this din we call life. I would call it serendipity, but that would be dumb. After all, I am you and you are me. Before I met you, I was all but a helpless little kid in diapers. In the beginning, I was like an animal encountering one's reflection in the water. I didn't know whether you were a friend or a foe. I still don't. But oh, what a journey we have had. I wish I could talk to you in the later rather than the now. But what to do? We are all the slaves of time." Andrew?
Very nice. So, would you like to start with the comics now, the comic section, the IIHS
Yeah.
team? There's another chat.
Okay. Where's the chat?
Did you want us to read out something?
No. We were just looking through.
We were just wondering if we should take the break right now or continue with this and then.
I think we can continue with this. I think you can move on to talking about how to write a comic script, and then we'll go into
Yeah,
the details of, and then maybe we can pick up something written over here and then see how that could translate to a comic script in some way, I guess.
sure. Okay.
Okay, so
There's
let's
a
do the
15-minute break. We'll
so let's do the Maithili and the Minotaur thing right now, and then you can talk about your
okay.
writing process.
Cool. You can read that as I take the script.
Okay. Um, Andrew, you want to just start talking about this comic that you've worked on?
Okay. So let's just get back to the comic script. So this is something that I've co-created with Raji Vibe, and it's called Maithili and a Minotaur. It has not been published yet, but I think it's going to be published later in the year. And I thought we could kind of show you what it's like to write a comic script, and then to sort of take a look at the images right next to them. And after this, Sahitya will sort of take over and talk about how like images and text go together, and also about the languages of a comic, the paneling, and everything else. So when you're writing a comic, what you're doing is that you're working along with an illustrator, and you're sort of discussing together and sort of showing them what needs to be illustrated and what needs to go into dialogue. So in many ways, a comic script, it's actually borrowed from the cinematic language, and it uses the same cinematic language, to be honest. And I'm just going to show you the first page for now. And I'm going to just read from it. So in page 1, panel 1, it says, Maithili and the Minotaur are seen climbing down a dark and airy stairway, and we see their shadows cast against the wall. Maithili's shadow looks normal, but the Minotaur's looks large and terrifying. It almost looks like the Minotaur shadow is about to attack Maithili's. The two are walking down the stairway that leads to a basement, and right where the stairway ends, there is a shabby wooden cellar door with large metal hoops, the kind you're likely to find on a medieval door. The door also appears to be rattling ever so slightly. And then in my script, I've said the Minotaur, and the Minotaur is basically saying Maithili, and then Minotaur says, we shouldn't be down here, and the caption says, my name's Maithili. So if you take a look at the first panel and then of the description right over here, you'd see that all the details that have gone into this have sort of gone into creating this image. And I'm just going to take you through this entire page, and you'll slowly start to see things where the illustrator, where Rajiv has sort of added stuff to sort of cover my back, by which I mean, when you write a comic, you sometimes write a lot of senseless things, like the light comes from the left instead of the right, whereas the window would be on the right. So it's a collaborative process where the illustrator co-creates along with you and writes and creates this world together. So the second panel goes, the focus of this image should be on the door. It's seen rattling violently, and we hear groans coming from and we hear groans seeping out of the cellar door. Brains, rains, ains. Would be cool to draw that text into the image right next to the door. The usual way of doing this is to actually say SFX and then write brains, rains, ains, but it just felt in the flow, so that's why I did it. So Maithili is seen seated on the floor with her hands on the metal hoop. She's caught in a moment where she's about to open it. The door is slightly ajar, maybe a couple of menacing eyes blinking away in the darkness. Maithili, I'm scared, the Minotaur says. Caption, and this is my new friend Minotaur. Third panel. In this image, we see a ghoul climbing out of the door. The ghoul sort of looks like a Smeagol zombie hybrid, sort of like the zombie from Plants vs. Zombies. They are ugly, but in the cutest way possible. We also see Maithili and the Minotaur holding each other and screaming. They're at the base of the stairs and have somehow managed to slip and fall over backwards. A few feet in front of them, we see a few more ghouls limping towards them. They're almost about to grab the two children. And then you have the caption. And then you come back to panel 4, where we break from this and you see an image of a classroom with a bunch of monsters, perhaps 3 or 4. And this is one place where only one of the characters has been identified. So let me just read this to you. Uh, right up front, next to the blackboard, we see the class teacher, a tall creature with colorful striped socks. The teacher kind of looks like a hybrid between him from the Powerpuff Girls and an Indian NGO worker. The teacher is seen taking the attendance and scribbling into his notebook. And then right in the next thing, we see an image of Maithili in her old school, essentially. So what you can actually find here is the amount of detailing and world building that Rajiv has sort of put in. For example, these two characters, the one with the multiple eyes and the crocodile creature that's biting into a book, and the ape creature, is something that Rajiv created completely all by himself. And this is a creature. So the teacher, as you see here, was supposed to be spiky and more monster-like, but then we sort of settled on a more human-looking creature who, in a little into the story, we'll sort of read a little more about him. So if you see this page, what you'll find is that every single panel or my writing is kind of describing what is happening in every single panel. And it's giving you an idea as to the actions that need to go there. And the captions, in many cases, are completely not in sync with the images themselves. And this comes back to starting strong with a story, because this is the hook. So when I wrote this, I wanted something to draw the readers in. So I started with them, right into the action, and they're going into this thing, and then they're finding these zombies. And then you sort of come back to the classroom and I'm just sort of sitting around. If you scroll down to the next page. So so I'm not going to read all the panels here, but if you look at the script right next to it, you'll see that in panel 1, I've just sort of said that there are noises coming from outside, and Maithili is sort of curious about what these noises are and is kind of trying to get the Minotaur's attention. Panel 2, however, I would read. And in panel 2, it says, in this image, we see Maithili poking the student in front of her, the Minotaur, with a pencil. The Minotaur looks like he's concentrating in class and really doesn't want to be disturbed. Maithili is seen making pissed sounds. And then, yeah. So what Rajiv has done here is that you'd actually, if you take a look at image 1, image 2, and image 3, it just goes from Maithili noticing a sound to Maithili talking to the Minotaur or interrupting him, and then the teacher telling them to get out. So what Rajiv has included is the teacher making a coughing ahem sound, and it sort of completes the action from this to this, and it's no longer an abrupt Maithili Minotaur get out, but you sort of see it adds closure to this. And I'm going to ramble on for a small bit, but this is one of those things that you can do in comics, but you can't do in any other medium. And Scott McCloud, who I think he calls this thing closure, by which he talks about, say there is this character who is swinging an axe. And you have this character with an axe, and you have this character who is about to swing the axe on another character. So in this panel, you just see character A with their axe held high, about to swing it down. And then your next panel, the one that follows, all you see is a scream. It's an exterior shot of the building, and the words are coming out. So if you kind of think about it, there is nowhere where he's explicitly said that the character is swinging the axe on, is axing that the other person. that action takes place inside your own minds. So all they showed was an axe up in the air and an exterior shot of a scream. So what happens when you're reading a comic is that your mind puts together the actions and creates an image right in between. And in that image, you see the axe swing, and thereby it makes you part of the murder. And I think this is something that is unique to comics, or comics as a way of storytelling, because when it's prose, you're reading text and you're imagining the entire thing in your minds. Whereas when you're watching a movie, they're giving you exactly what you want. I mean, exactly what they want to show you, and you're being bombarded by it. So you don't have the time to sort of think. And this is why comics has a special place as a means of storytelling for me, because I feel that it's the most collaborative form where the reader is sort of in on the comic, and you kind of have to create it together along with your reader. Um, so coming back to the script, what so now what happens is, I'm going back to reading this actually. So in this image, Maitli and the Minotaur are in the hallway. Maitli is leading the way, and a very reluctant Minotaur is seen following after her. The hallway they're walking along can be drawn in such a way that it leads into darkness. It's almost as though they are going to an airy tunnel. And the closer they get to the end, the louder the grunting sounds from the darkness gets. Grains, brains, lanes. Maitli says, "Come on, Slowpoke," and Minotaur says, and she says, "Don't you want to see what's in there?" Minotaur is a bit reluctant. So the next one is very easy. So it just says, "Move out." This is a long shot of the two walking down a dark pathway. And the panel after that says, "Image of one of the school ghouls touching the Minotaur." Maitli and the Minotaur are seen holding each other and look extremely scared, the Minotaur more than Maitli. As a matter of fact, the Minotaur is full on freaking out. The next panel says, "In this image, we see Maitli holding the Minotaur's hand. She's just sprung up and is trying to help her friend to stand up and run away. The school ghouls, however, are taken aback and they kind of look sad." And finally, the third page, which I'm not going to read, if you take a look at it, you'll see that the characters were sort of misunderstood the entire time, and that they weren't trying to eat their brains, but they were just saying names. And it's because these four kids had wandered off into the basements and were locked, and couldn't sort of find their way back. And over the course of the years, they forgot their names. And the only way to bring them out was to give them names. And that's what Maitli does. And now she has more than one friend in school. So this is essentially how the comic starts. And this is how I write a comic. And what Sahitya is going to do now is that she is going to get into a little more detail about this. And she's going to show you how it's drawn, as well as the language of a comic, by which I mean the panels, the gutters, uh, the chat bubbles, and the different kind of speech bubbles, etc.
Okay, so all right, so far we saw how to write a story, and then we saw a sample of what a comic script looks like. So basically, because like Andrew said, a comic script is supposed to tell me, the illustrator, and also the letterer, exactly what the images are supposed to look like, what the camera angle is like, where the character is going, what the character is doing, what the character is saying, and stuff like that. So there's a certain grammar that goes into comic books. There are certain conventions followed when it comes to writing dialogues, writing captions for time and space, etc. So I'm going to quickly run you through a couple of options of what speech balloons and captions and other things in comics look like. Now, I do want to make it clear that these are examples from very American traditions. traditional comics, like your Marvel, DC superhero comics that have been around since the 30s and the 40s. While it's quite a universal convention, different traditions like manga and European and Franco-Belgian comics, they have their own traditions. Okay, they don't necessarily stick to this, but this is a very good, clear benchmark for us to start from. Okay, so the language of a comic book. Now, initially, the first image over here talks about different kinds of time and place captions. So this is something that you would use in an exposition or an establishing shot. So if you had a shot of a large mansion, for instance, and you would say, meanwhile, at this location. So these captions describe the time and the place. And they are written usually in, simple rectangles like this to differentiate from what we call speech balloons. So this is a very standard speech balloon. An important thing to note here is that you have to make sure that the balloon tail always points towards the mouth of the character, like to the maximum possible extent. A lot of times you are in situations as a writer and illustrator and letterer that you don't have enough room and you have to kind of move the balloon to the corner of the panel, so you have to cut some things, you have to crop some things, but to the maximum possible extent, what you try to do is to make sure that the balloon tail points to the character that's speaking said dialogue. This all I'll come back to how we do connecting balloons later. The one on the right, I think you would have seen, this is a thought bubble. So this is when something is not being spoken out loud, but the character is thinking. So you go with a simple thought cloud. So I think all of this would be quite familiar to you. The next, for instance, a wavy balloon. So I'm showing you all of this to say that the lettering itself brings a lot of character to what the dialogue is like. You already have the illustration, but then when you see a wavy balloon like this, it invokes a certain mood. The font size is getting smaller. The dialogue says the light grows dimmer, my lifetime is short, I'm nearly, and then you have these little marks which are called breath marks. So when you read this, you understand that the character is fading or the character is dying. So which means you can play around with their speech bubbles. And this is something a lot of artists do to differentiate characters as well. So if you look at this in the middle, this is something you would use for a telepathic character, a character with telepathic powers, like say Jean Grey or Professor Xavier. So if you would use something like this, you would always associate a speech bubble like this with a character like Professor Xavier. So even if he weren't in the panel, you would know that it's him who is speaking or him who is transmitting his thoughts. So these are other variations that you can use. Then we have something like really rough, ragged looking speech balloons, which work for monstrous characters or ghouls or some, alien monsters, goblins, I guess. Then we come to something known as whisper balloons. So if you want to establish that the character is not talking loudly, but they're just whispering, they want you to be quiet, you can do it in, one of these three ways. You can either use a dashed balloon like this, you can actually fade the balloon out entirely, or another way, if you notice, is to make the text inside the balloon really small. This isn't something that you would do normally because it affects readability, but this kind of indicates that the character is speaking with a really small voice. Okay, so that's another layer that you add to the character. The ones in the middle are usually used for, radios and television. So if there's some narration or if there's a dialogue that's coming through a television or a radio or a transistor, you would probably do something like this. Now, the last one here is an exact opposite to the whisper balloons. This is something you would use if you wanted to indicate that the character is angry and was shouting. And you would also use bold italic letters inside to draw more focus. So this is another variation. Okay. again, we come back to these marks that I had mentioned earlier, if you remember, when we were talking about a character just, dying and fading away. These indicate, a cough or just heavy breathing or something. So it just means that, either the character could be panting, the character is tired, the character is dying. So you can use these sort of marks to indicate that. Then we come to connecting balloons. So a lot of times, you could have a character on the left, you could have a character on the right, and they're both talking, but they're both saying things one after another. And this is all the space you have. So how do you do that? The character is placed over here, but first the character on the right says who, then the character responds you, and then the character says oh right. But to maintain the sequence, you would connect the balloons like this. We read this left to right, so you follow it correctly, but you connect the balloons like this, and you make sure that the balloon tails point to the mouths of the character. So this is another way to fit in a lot of text and a lot of dialogue in a small panel, and also make it very clear as to which character is speaking when and what they're saying. Another way to connect thought and dialogue and balloons is to just connect them like this. But if there's a break in thought, you use ellipses to say, like I see you come back, dear doctor, and then there's a pause, and then you go to I've waited a long time for my revenge. So this is the same character talking, but he's stopping for a minute. So these are, I just wanted you to have a look at these. This is from Blambot. I will share those resources with you. So if you were to, write a script and you wanted to specify what kind of characters they are, you also think about how they would speak. And because a comic being a visual medium, how they would speak is visually represented by, different kind of balloons, by different kind of connectors, by different kind of marks and stuff like that. So this is a very quick overview of some traditional, comic book conventions. What I want to show you next is how I would translate, a script to a comic. So I'm going to show you this. Okay, so this is another comic that Andrew had written. So we're just going to look at the description first, and then I'll show you the panel, and then we can also talk about paneling and editing and gutters as we go on. So first panel says, we're at the janitor's closet under the stairs. The space under the stairs is dark, and we see a metal gate of sorts. That kind of makes the space under the stairs look like a tiny jail, murmuring from under the stairs. Someone's outside. Are they listening? So if we look at this panel over here, so all Andrew has told me that there's a closet which is under the stairs, and that there's some whispering, and that it's a school corridor and it's empty. But the choice of the camera angle and everything in this case was up to me. A lot of times the writer does specify that we need the camera to be a top shot or a low angle shot, depending on the kind of mood that you want to create. So at this point, I felt that it does look a little eerie because you see the stairs leading up and they're empty. You also see an empty corridor, and there's a pitch black area over here from where you have these faded balloons to again indicate that they're whispering. So another thing to keep in mind is the rule of thirds. So if you take any image and you divide it into thirds vertically and horizontally, where those lines intersect is usually the point of focus where your eye is drawn to the most. So in this case, it's somewhere around this area, right? It's pitch black. I want this to be the point of focus, and which is where I'm keeping, all the action happening over here. So then we move on to the next panel. It says, this panel is more or less dark. Only we see a hand calling out to the reader, drawing them in. So we already have established this scene. So with here, we're just moving in closer. So that's what this panel looks like. In the next one, we move in even closer. So this is finally where a camera angle has changed. Initially, we were just going closer, and finally, we are actually meeting our characters. Okay. Then here it says, let's go to panel 4. We finally see Satya's face, and she's smiling at the reader. My name is Satya, and this is my gang. A large panel of Satya's friends. We have their names scribbled onto them. Now, what I've done over here, I've actually just taken the liberty, as I do very often with Andrew's writing, to actually merge panel 4 and 5 to create this sort of a title panel. Okay, so this sits under everything. It feels like, a poster. It feels like if this is issue 1, this is where you would see the title, this is where you meet all the characters. You kind of get a sense of, what kind of monster kids they are. So at this point, I chose to actually merge those panels. So we have this large pink thing, and then you see all the characters being introduced. So this is what the comic looks like. Actually, after this, I'm going to show you another comic because I wanted to speak about how you can use gutters. So just to explain, gutters are the space in between panels. Now, while that seems like a very trivial thing, it's just space where nothing is drawn. In comics, it's actually the space where a lot happens. Okay, so I'm just going to show you. So yeah, so this was something that we had done for the Gandhi's 150th birth anniversary in 2019. So this was published by the Mint. Now, in this, there's actually some very interesting use of gutters. So I wanted you to take a look. Now, let's look at this part. Okay. Here. So this is panel 11. If you look at this, it says, in this panel, we see the pamphlet being printed in large volumes. There is a system of passes in natal, any Indian who, etc., etc. Caption, Gandhi's green pamphlet made big news in India. The next panel says, an angry mob is formed and they're seen marching near the shipping docks. We see the mob burning pamphlets. They're carrying sticks and they look angry to the extent that they're almost frothing at the mouth, but was received with vigilance in South Africa. So if you look at this area, normally, one way to do this would have been to just draw a printing press separately on this panel, and then over here move to a very long shot and show a very angry mob just wrecking the whole place. But this kind of makes it, but doing this, having this character's hand reaching over to the next panel kind of connects the two incidents as well. So here we talk about the panels being printed, and there's a sense of immediacy in the response of the people to the action that happened in the previous panel. So in a way, the gutter over here, it separates the two incidents, but it also tells us that they were connected, they were very, very closely connected over here. I think we can even look at the next image. The next one. here. In this image, we see that Gandhi has left the ship. He's being harassed by the angry mob. Turbans are being pulled. He's being pelted with stones and eggs. So, panel 13 and 14, it says, panel 14 says, in this image, we see an English woman standing in the way of a beaten down Gandhi and the mob. The woman has a parasol open and she's using it to ward away the crowd or at least keep them at bay. Now, again, this was again an artistic choice. You know, what we know is that both these panels talk about how people were attacking Gandhi, but the very iconic visual moment over here happens to be the English woman who's actually stopping, uh, you know, the bricks and stones from hitting Gandhi, and she's actually protecting him. So again, I thought it would be dramatic, I guess, for dramatic effect, to merge the content of these two panels and present them in a way that they overlap like this. So yeah, I think this is about gutters. So if you have any questions so far about whatever I've shown you, please just put them on the chat, because after this, I think
Vijay has said the style is very manga, and this was for the pack. How did you choose the style for your story?
How do I choose a style for my story? Okay, so when it comes to art styles, I think a lot of it has to do with the visual library that you've built for yourself, the kind of work that you've been exposed to, the kind of work that you enjoy reading, and you automatically, like how Andrew said, when it comes to writing, he draws from experience, imagination, and memories. Even for creating art, I draw from things I'm familiar with. So I basically watch a lot of anime, I've read a lot of manga. There's something about the style that I find to be really attractive visually, and also it's a lot of fun to do. So, and also Andrew's story in this case was about, it was this really wacky school, where the students are are a kind of monsters, but they just try to be so bad. They just try to go out and do all kinds of mischievous things, but for some reason it just ends up working out for the good of the school. So it's one of those paradoxical situations. So it was a very out there kind of funny story, which is kind of why I felt that I wanted to try a manga sort of approach to it. Do you have any questions so far about this, or should we just look at a couple of more samples from different comics and just look at some paneling and breakdown and understand how editing and stuff works? Or do you guys want to break and just tell me what you think, and then we can move on accordingly? Samples? Okay, awesome. So I'm just going to go to the next bit of the presentation. Okay, so before this, we just saw some of the work that Andrew and I had done, and I was talking about gutters, paneling, and editing. So when you talk about, so when I get a script, right, the first thing that I have to do is basically draw these panels. Andrew tells me that there are 6 panels on a page, and Andrew tells me there are 6 panels on a page, and I have to figure out, this is the size of the page, these are the margins, this is roughly how it's going to look in print. So after that, it's up to me to figure out where which panel goes. So a lot of times the panel description will say that it's a character that is celebrating, and that is the most important drawing on the page. So I kind of know that this panel gets the most real estate, right? So if you look at the image in the middle, this is from a manga called Haikyuu. If anyone has ever seen it, there's an amazing anime. It's about volleyball. It's about high school volleyball, and it's one of the best sports manga and anime of recent times. So over here, very obviously, this character Bokuto, he is a very loudmouthed character, and I know that his celebration panel requires that much space. So I kind of block it out. I block out almost 2/3 of the page for just one panel. Okay, and the next panel says I need to show his friends reacting, I need to show some more of the onlookers, and then I need to go back to the match. So this is him celebrating in the middle of a match, and then there are people looking at what kind of a cartoon he is, and then they are coming back to the match. Also, I'm reading right to left here, guys, because it's manga and that's how it works. So, and then we go back to the match. So this whole page, the most important thing is celebration. So then you make that the biggest panel. That's how I would lay it out in the roughs. Then you show some, then you show some reactions, and then you quickly bring the readers back to the story, which is this panel on the bottom left. So in this case, because you read from right to left, that's how you would plan it out. Similarly, if you look at the one on the right, it's very atmospheric, right? So there's this is from Vagabond. It's by a mangaka called Takehiko Inoue. I can share the links and the names later on if you want. So this is a very atmospheric sort of a thing. He's got a samurai sword and he's got the water. And again, you read this from right to left. You see the water, then you see the samurai, you see the water, you see his reaction. Then again, it's the water that he's cutting through. And then this is the hero panel. You see the whole samurai, you see the samurai character standing, you see the water, you see him cutting through the water. And just as a reaction, you zoom in on the face. So what something like this does is it makes you pause for a second, look at the entire spread, look at the character, and just get in the moment. Unlike the paneling we saw before, which is very quick and chaotic and it's just moving because it's a sports anime, an inset panel like this, where there's focus on the face, kind of draws you into the character. Okay, so these are stylistic choices on paneling and layout that you need to make as an illustrator when you're reading the script. A lot of times the script will tell you that, okay, we need a large panel for something like this, but how large? Does the panel require a border? Is the hair going to overlap? Does it need to be, like how much room does it require? All of these are decisions you make based on the pace and flow of the story. And then you can do something as radical as this comic over here on the left, which honestly I haven't read and I've been meaning to. But if you see, the panels are numbered over here. So this is panel 1, and then you go to 2, which is over here. Then you go to 3 here. Then you go to 4, 5, and 6. So this is something really radical, because as the story progresses, it sort of feels like a cube and you're just looking at it from different directions. So this is another completely out of the box editorial paneling style that you can look at. But this is mainly about pacing and gutters. Then just a couple of more very quick examples. On the left, you have Day Tripper, which is written by these Brazilian comic writers, Fabio Moon and Gabriel Ba. They're twins. And Gabriel Ba is also the one who's illustrated The Umbrella Academy, if you guys are into that. So this story is again very character-led, right? So throughout, you're seeing just characters, you're establishing who they are. There's a lot of dialogue, there's a lot of room until, there's a moment of thought. So if you look at the framing, you're looking at the character, he's doing something. But the minute he has something important to think about, say, you move into a very close shot of the character until the very end when you actually show what he's thinking about. So this also builds the pace, and it's symmetric in a way because on the top and the bottom, the panels, the margins are not there. The color just bleeds all the way through the edge of the page. So this is something that's very stylistic of Day Tripper. It has a lot of these fluid, flowy watercolor backgrounds with panels placed on top of it. So that's another stylistic choice if you were going for it. The page in the middle is from a book called Mesmo Delivery. It's by Rafael Grampa, who I think is doing the next Batman comic by Frank Miller. This is basically an action sequence, okay? And there's really nothing to say about this. It's wacky in every which way possible. The last one is by Dave Mazzucchelli. It's from a comic called Asterios Polyp. What's very interesting about this, if you notice, is that the colors are just cyan, magenta, like CMYK is used. Our main character, this man over here, is in cyan, and this woman he sees at a party is in magenta. So here they've played with the use of color as well, you know. So they're very dissonant panels because they've just come to a party and they don't know who they are. They've never met each other. So he's drawn them differently like this, you know, and even the panels are not aligned. It's all just all over the place until they actually begin to have a conversation where you see just those two characters are drawn in cyan and magenta, and it's a very stable panel at the bottom to establish that, okay, meeting has happened, conversation has happened, they have kind of hit it off, you know. So this is what here he's used paneling, spacing, and also color to add another layer of depth to the story. Okay. And of course, syncity, this is the use of negative space. So sorry. Yeah. The use of negative space and very dramatic camera angles. But that's also the whole aesthetic of Sin City, right? There's very powerful writing and there are very sharp lines, very sharp shadows. So it gives a whole new vibe to this. The one in the middle is from Kingdom Come, which is, and the artist is Alex Ross. Now, over here, I know we're talking about paneling and gutters, but this is completely merged. You know, there's so much happening on this page, right? Like he's just used a torn paper effect to create that feel, to just, you know, divide the different sections of the story. There's a fight happening, there are supervillains and there are superheroes, people are saving children. There's this guy who's laughing. So there are like 5 different things happening on this one page. But because the division is not very clear, you get a sense that it's all happening in the same space and it's very, very fluid. Okay. Now, to circle back to what Andrew was saying about closure and the idea of the reader being involved in a comic story, which is what makes comics unique, we are going to look at the last page of The Killing Joke. So this was written by Alan Moore. I'm sure all of you have heard Killing Joke, have read Killing Joke. So this moment, we see the Joker, he's laughing. He's just continuously laughing. So until this point, until this page, the Batman and the Joker had been fighting, and this is when Barbara Gordon was assaulted. So Batman is just really mad with the Joker in this story. And Batman is known to be that really serious, he will stickler for the rules kind of superhero. Until we come to this panel and we see him laugh. And then the Joker continues to laugh and the Batman laughs. And this panel is basically that moment which defines what the Batman is doing. He's basically just grabbed the Joker. And after this, we don't really see the end of the sequence, right? All we see is that the Batman has grabbed the Joker, he's lifted him off his feet, and they're just laughing and they're laughing and they're laughing. And then you hear sirens in the back and the cops come in. So a lot of people do believe that this is the one story where the Batman broke his rules and he did kill the Joker, but a lot of people believe maybe he did not. So it's one of those stories where the reader kind of has a very important part to play in how you interpret Alan Moore's writing. Okay, and all of that happens in between the panels. Okay, so he's picked him up, and then we come to the bottommost. We don't know, we haven't been shown what has happened, but we can make a guess. So that's the idea of, I guess, closure in comics. And lastly, just some very beautiful pages because I thought you guys must absolutely see them. On the left, we have a page from Habibi, which is by Craig Thompson. If you guys get a chance, you must absolutely read it. So, see, I'm just trying to show you the range of paneling and the kind of work that actually can be done. This all of this is very fluid. It's very unlike traditional panels that we've seen so far. So this is Habibi. The center one is from Shiraz Day. It's by Sergio Topi. So it's about, I think, the Arabian Nights. This woman had to tell a story every night to the king so she wouldn't be put to death. So that woman's name was Shiraz Day. So this is a collection of the stories that she tells the king to save her life. And the last thing over here is from a book called Through the Woods by Emily Carroll. So these are examples of how all the rules that we've seen so far are completely broken to create something so stunning. This is basically a point where I just circle back and say that comics are the only thing about comics you have to remember is that it's sequential art. You need to have something before and after. And while there are certain traditions and there are certain rules that we follow, you can also just take the leap and go completely crazy and create something like this. Andrew, do you want to add something?
Yeah, yeah. So it's exactly what you said. If you're being realistic here, the entire how to write a comic workshop can be broken down into 2 minutes. And I think I have an example for it. So basically, what you're doing is that you're just telling an illustrator what you would want, what you want illustrated. So, for example, if you have a 3-panel comic, in the first one you have a panel where you see a dog. So you would say, "I see a dog near the by a sidewalk." And then the next panel, if you want the dog to run into a busy street, you would just say, "I see a dog running into the busy street." And then for the third panel, if you want the action to sort of, if you wanted to say move out, and if you want to hear like the screeching of a car's tire, you would just say, move out. I mean, we see the screeching of a car's tire. Now, this is the base element of your comic. Everything that goes on top of that is layering. For example, so I didn't specify camera angles with these 3 panels, but what if I tell Satya, okay, I want this to be worm's eye view, and let's say camera is kept right on ground level, and you see a dog sort of like this, and then I want to include a 4th panel, and then the 4th panel is say a move out where we see the dog owner sort of on the floor staring into the road. It kind of just changes the element of the story completely. So I guess what I'm saying is just telling the illustrator what to draw is the first step of writing a comic, and then it's the layering, and then it's do the car does it need to be a particular kind of car? If so, why? And then describe it. What time of the night is it? Is it the morning? Is it late in the night? I don't know if a few of you imagined it as morning and a few of you imagined it as late in the night, but is there a particular reason why it has to be a time? And would you like to give the illustrator the panel breakdown for the page, or is it fine for the breakdown to be whatever? I mean, the panel layout to be whatever it needs to be. Um, and finally, it just comes down to lettering. Like for when the car is screeching, are you going to say screech and then add it as SFX? Do you want to add dialogue for the dog, say woof or dog yelping? Do you want that to go as in a speech bubble, or do you want that to go as SFX? And it's really, really as simple as that. But I think it's like all things, it's developing the craft. And the more you write, the more things you would notice about comics, and the more technicalities you can get into. Uh, but other than that, it's quite very straightforward. I think we have a question. Sasya?
Hang on. I think with manga, I think it was originally started off as this, it's a weekly issue sort of a thing that comes out in a magazine, and it's an anthology, and it's, you know, part of something that, it has to be produced really fast. So I think it's a very comic tradition difference between, the graphic novel scene in India and the manga scene in Japan. So I think today we're seeing more of these self-published zines and self-published comics, trying to hit the market. What do you think, Andrew?
I think our during India's golden age of comics, which is probably the 70s and the 80s, they did use low quality paper to print. I think Amar Chitra Katha is probably a good example of this.
Actually,
And
yeah,
so are all of the pulp magazines that we used to read. Yeah.
yeah.
And a reason, so we used to sell about 250,000 comics easy back in those days. What happened in India was that the TV sort of came into the limelight, and I actually have an article about this. So the TV kind of killed the comics, but I think manga tradition sort of went hand in hand with television. So I follow One Piece, which is an epic of a manga. It's incredibly long, and a lot of primetime Japanese television slots are allotted towards anime, and they need manga for this. So commercially, which is why Japan is a very successful comic market more than anything else in the world.
It's also a very difficult market to work in, let's be very real. But yeah, that's a different discussion.
Yeah, people
What
kill
a,
themselves by working.
yeah, the work culture is a very different thing. But yeah, I guess it just comes down to what these days TV and internet are still a very large part of Indian, entertainment culture as such, as opposed to fortnightly magazines like Chandamama and all of that, which even my parents used to read, and we had some great magazines back in the day. So I think it also has to do with, yeah, like Andrew said, TV's taken over, and we don't have much of content and animation being drawn from the stories which are serialized in children's magazines and stuff. So I think there's still a way for that to happen. Okay,
Yeah, all it takes
Nayan,
is one, say, Netflix thing or something.
yeah, actually. Okay, Nayan says, what all apps are great to use for comic creation apart from Adobe? Well, I've actually just used Photoshop mostly, but I tried Clip Studio Paint and it's not bad. It's actually very useful for creating your layouts and your panels, and it actually makes it quite easy. So you might want to check out Clip Studio Paint. It's not free though. So I think I just used a trial version, but I might just go back to familiar stuff, which is Photoshop. Um, Any more questions, guys? Or what are we doing next?
I can show that one spread, the full page spread of Mighty and a Minotaur with the rough drawing thing
Yeah, share your screen
and what it came
and
to be basically. Do you have it with you?
I don't actually. Hang on, let me.
So Mythili and the Minotaur is unpublished, and it's something that I've been working on for a while, and hopefully it should be out by the end of this year. So Rajiv and I have been working on it for quite some time. So I'm very obsessed about it now, and it just so happens that whenever I'm obsessed about something work-wise, I'll just continuously talk about that more than anything else.
Okay, I'm trying to find
I was also thinking that
After this, do a few exercises.
like maybe come up with a one-page comic and brainstorm a few ideas perhaps
Yeah, actually,
right
let's
after we
do
show
that
on
because
this.
my setup's a little off right now. I think we
Sure.
can jump to the next bit of the
The
Yeah.
ending bits, yeah.
Yeah.
You can, I think it's been part of the slide.
Yeah. Hang on. Just sharing. Share. And here we go. All right. So you guys, Andrew, take over.
Yeah, I just thought, now that you know what a comic is and how to write a comic script, um, you could use the references, like we'll share some of the references with you as to like the language of a comic and perhaps also a sample page with you. And sorry, what we thought was that you could use that as a jumping off point and write your own comic, maybe a 1 to 3 page comic. And just to start you off, I thought we could, come up, I mean, try to discuss a few ideas. It works better if it's interactive, but I think I would just have to like go back and forth with Sahitya. Uh, so I think one of the interesting ways to go about writing a story or a comic is to just try and do just the dialogues. Just try to tell a story with just the dialogues. So if you actually want to write a comic using just dialogue, there's a trope actually where you have a table right in the middle and then you have two people sitting across it. And just to try and tell a story with just person A and person B. So there are multiple options that would present themselves. For example, it could be a cop and a robber. It could be an investigation in a cell. It could be two people on their first date. It extends to different genres. And it's a story where you would use just dialogues to tell this comic. And I thought this would be a good way to start, writing dialogues for a particular comic page, or just write a scene. It doesn't need to be a story per se. Uh, Watch and listen is a bit creepy. So I was just going to suggest that just go around watching, observing people and listening to them, whilst trying not to be too creepy about it. Because you'll be surprised at where some of your ideas come from. It could be eavesdropping on people talking. It could be the most mundane conversation, but it gives you a window into something that's real or a life that's real, and that's a really nice drawing point to start a story if uh, one is starved for a story. Another way that I write comics or stories, and I think Sahitya is also involved in this, is that you come up with the title first, and then you sort of try to write the story. So all you do is that you come up with a really catchy uh,
Yeah.
title. For example, uh, a knock on the door 6,000 feet over. It's not as catchy, but it's the one I can think off the top of my head, and it can go in line with the plane thing that I was talking about. Uh, yeah, and you could just note down a few titles and then just sort of reverse engineer your way. The love letter is actually an icebreaker. So, but there's also another letter there, which I did read. Uh, okay, and this is 3 times. And 3 times is actually about writing from experience. So what you're going to do is you're going to think of 3 times where you felt something. So if you're writing horror, it would be 3 times where you were actually scared. Think back to 3 times where you were totally scared and horrified. What were they? Write them down and see what made you scared. Why were you afraid? Was it, your towel hanging on the door that looked like a ghost? You just need to like note this down. Or 3 times that you felt butterflies in your stomach, that could be something for romance. And what we're doing here is that we're using something that is real, or something that is our own, and we're using that to go into our work. Because whatever said and done, even if you write fiction, you are putting a considerable amount of yourself into the work. Um, and other than this, I also think writing from memory is something that is important. And when I say writing from memory, I mean, so this kind of constitutes the books that you read, the movies that you watch, or some random fact that you read about, tongues of giraffes being blue. No, I'm not sure if that's accurate. Polar bear tongues are blue? I'm not sure.
I
Uh,
think so.
yeah, and it would go into the story, and you know, uh, so there's memory, and then there's what you have, which is part of your experience, and finally imagination.
And there's
So
also just, curiosity and just and plain fascination, like for instance, if there's something that really fascinates you, if there's some place you've never actually been to, but you still feel like you want to write about it or draw about it, like Kodaikanal, for instance. I've never been to Kodai, but I really want to draw about the place. I'm just very fascinated by the pictures. Something that intrigues you. You can always use that as well to channel, some visuals or just some ideas to make your story layered and rich. I think one thing I wanted to bring up is um, the idea of doing a dissonant narrative with comics, because it's something that you can do pretty much only in comics, because you have text and you also have image. And while they are telling you one story, they don't, a lot of times they don't necessarily have to. The text could be, leading the story one way, the images could be leading the story in another way, until you come to a point where they meet and it kind of adds up and makes sense. But the idea is that the text and the image in a comic is never redundant. It's always adding another layer of depth, or it's telling you something more, it's telling you something the writing can't, or it's telling you something the images can't. So I think that's one thing we didn't talk about, and I thought I should just bring it up while we're discussing writing comics. Something you want to add, Andrew?
yeah, I was just thinking about it, how this would have been so much fun if it were in person,
Yeah,
because we'd
absolutely.
have made sure that you guys were doing
I think we still have
your
to
tiny little
crack
assignments.
this. We still have to crack this format, and how to actually get the assignments done over online thing. But yeah,
Yeah, maybe you could send it into IHS if you are interested. It does sound like homework, uh, but the more you write, or the more you write comic scripts, the better, the easier it gets. And if you are, a writer or an illustrator, then I think it's important to write every day or draw every day, even if it's just something. Uh,
yeah.
yeah, if you have any more questions, we'd be happy to take them. And I guess the city scripts people are here now.
Thanks, both of you. Are you wrapped up with whatever you needed to?
Yep. We've pretty much wrapped up. So if we actually just left time for questions and stuff. So if there's anything you guys
Yeah,
want
I
to
think so far we've
ask,
shared everything that's come via YouTube
yeah,
and all of it. Maybe we can just wait a couple of minutes if anyone has
yeah,
questions. Otherwise,
absolutely. Yep.
yeah, but thank you so much for this workshop. I think it's, one of the things that we always try to do is, to take, well, for us, it's of course research in multiple forms outside. And I think that your workshop has really sort of opened up how we can think about even serious narratives. So thank
Yeah.
you so much for, giving us this broad kind of a mosaic and a lot of ideas to build on. Um, there is something. Would you suggest open source or GNU alternatives to tools you use?
Um, Uh, so I'm actually not very familiar with open source tools right now, because I've just been using Adobe, and it's been the industry standard for a while. So I've actually stuck to just those, but I think there are a lot of open source softwares out there. I think Krita and stuff does work, but it's something that you'll have to look into further. I haven't really used too many open source softwares to actually give you a solid answer on that.
There's just another comment. Oh, there's one more. How do you deal with multiple languages within a story?
Multiple languages. So if it's a comic, and if it's a lot of my comics that are set in Tamil Nadu actually have a fair amount of Tamil that go into them, either in the background or just as part of the text. And I think it's, again, with comics, you can do this in a way where it still makes sense for somebody who does not know Tamil or cannot, be in on that tiny little joke, but is perfectly able to understand everything else. Another thing about comics is that they are so easily translatable because everything is just actions and movement. So you can just move from one form to the other, especially if it's a wordless comic. This is this is one of the ways that comic writers or comic creators make more money. It's because they don't need translators if it's something with very minimal text. And there are a whole lot of comics that have come out this year and the last year. I think, what is that comic called? Odyssey? The really cool French one with the fish on the cover. Like, I forget what it's called.
I forget the name. I know what you're talking about. Yeah. But anyway.
So if there are no more questions, I think we can wind up.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who joined us for this session. We'll take a break now and we'll be back at 6:30 for a session titled From the Intimate to the Streets, Documenting Our Lives in Cities During COVID-19. And this features several audiovisual women journalists from across the world. So please join us on the same Zoom link. Thank you.